Who can actually afford a $250,000 house in 2026? You're scrolling through Zillow at midnight again. There's this house, $249,900, 3 bedrooms, needs some work, but nothing major, decent neighborhood, maybe a 20-minute commute. You pull up the mortgage calculator for probably the 15th time this week. You plug in the numbers, the monthly payment pops up, and you just sit there. Because even though this is technically one of the cheaper houses on the market, even though $250,000 used to feel like a starter home price, something about the math just doesn't add up with your paycheck. And you're not even looking at expensive cities. This is a regular house in a regular place, and yet it feels completely out of reach. My name is Jack, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, real estate markets, and why the dream of homeownership, which used to feel like a natural milestone for working people, now feels like trying to grab smoke. And here's what keeps me up at night. We're not even talking about $500,000 homes in Los Angeles or $1 million condos in New York. We're talking about a $250,000 house. The kind of place that, in theory, should be attainable for people with decent jobs and reasonable savings. But somewhere between rising interest rates, inflation, stagnant wages, and a housing market that seems determined to price out an entire generation, the gap between wanting a home and actually being able to afford one has become this massive chasm that most people can't bridge. What you're about to hear isn't just about income requirements or down payment percentages, though we'll definitely get into that. This is about understanding the complete financial reality of what it actually takes to buy a $250,000 house right now. And honestly, why that number might be more difficult to achieve than it appears on paper. Because the truth is, the barriers to homeownership in 2026 aren't just about saving $20,000 or having a good credit score. They're about a fundamental shift in how housing affordability works in this country. And if you can see the full picture, you'll at least know exactly where you stand and what you're actually up against. The brutal math nobody wants to talk about. So let's start with the obvious question. What do you actually need to earn to afford a $250,000 house? And when I say afford, I'm not talking about technically qualifying for a loan. I'm talking about being able to make the payments without your entire life becoming a stress-filled nightmare where you're eating ramen 3 weeks out of every month. The traditional rule, and you've probably heard this before, is that your housing costs shouldn't exceed 28% of your gross income. That's what lenders typically use as their threshold for what they call the front-end ratio. Sounds reasonable enough, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Let's say you're buying that $250,000 house with a 10% down payment, which is $25,000. That means you're financing $225,000. At current interest rates, which are hovering somewhere around 6.5% to 7% depending on your credit and the specific day you're shopping, your monthly principal and interest payment is going to be roughly $1,550 to $1,650. But wait, and this is the part that always gets people, that's not your actual housing payment. You've also got property taxes, which vary wildly depending on where you live. In Texas, you might be looking at $400 to $500 a month. In California, maybe $250. Then there's homeowners insurance, which has absolutely exploded in the last few years. We're talking another $150 to $300 a month in many places, sometimes way more if you're in a flood zone or somewhere with wildfire risk. And if you put down less than 20%, you're paying PMI, private mortgage insurance, which could easily be another $150 to $200 monthly. Add it all up, and your actual monthly housing cost isn't $1,550. It's more like $2,200 to $2,500, sometimes higher. To stay within that 28% threshold, you'd need a gross monthly income of about $7,850 to $8,900. That translates to an annual income of roughly $94,000 to $107,000. For one person, that's a solidly upper-middle-class income in most of America. For a household, it's definitely achievable if both people are working professional jobs, but it's still well above the median household income in the United States, which sits around $75,000. And here's the thing that really bothers me about all this. That $250,000 house? In many parts of the country, that doesn't even get you something nice anymore. That's the fixer-upper. That's the house that needs a new roof in 3 years and has original appliances from 2008. The American dream has become, maybe you can afford the house that needs work if you make six figures. The down payment trap. Now let's talk about actually getting to the point where you can even make an offer. Because before you worry about monthly payments, you need the down payment. And this is where the whole thing starts to feel like a cruel joke for a lot of people. That 10% down payment I mentioned, that's $25,000. The median American has nowhere close to that in savings. According to recent data, the median savings account balance in the US is somewhere around $8,000. And that's not money sitting there waiting to be spent on a house. That's emergency funds, car repair money, the buffer that keeps you from going into debt when something breaks. So how do people actually save $25,000? Honestly, for most people, it takes years. If you're making $60,000 a year and you're aggressively saving, I'm talking 15% of your gross income, which most financial experts would say is excellent, you're putting away $9,000 annually. At that rate, saving $25,000 takes nearly 3 years. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong. No medical emergencies, no car breakdowns, no periods of unemployment, no helping out family members who are struggling. Just perfect, uninterrupted saving for 3 straight years. But here's what makes this even more complicated. While you're saving, housing prices are usually rising. If homes are appreciating at even 4% per year, that $250,000 house becomes $260,000, then $270,000. You're basically trying to hit a moving target while running on a treadmill. And don't even get me started on rent prices, because the people who need to save for a down payment are usually the same people getting crushed by rising rents, which makes saving nearly impossible. Some people will tell you about FHA loans, which only require 3.5% down. That's about $8,750 on a $250,000 house. Way more achievable. But those loans come with higher mortgage insurance premiums, and you're still looking at needing several $1,000s for closing costs on top of that down payment. Plus, in competitive markets, sellers often prefer conventional loans because they close faster and seem more reliable. An FHA offer might get passed over for a conventional one, even if it's the same price. The down payment isn't just a financial hurdle. It's basically a filter that determines who gets to even participate in the housing market. And increasingly, the answer is people who already have money or people who have family wealth to draw from. First-time buyers without family help are facing a challenge that's legitimately harder than what their parents faced. And that's not just perception. The math backs it up. The hidden costs that destroy budgets. Okay, so let's say you somehow navigate the down payment. You've got your mortgage, you're in the house. Congratulations! Now comes the part that absolutely nobody prepares you for. The constant, relentless stream of expenses that come with homeownership. I think a lot of renters picture homeownership as basically the same as renting, except you're paying a mortgage instead of rent and you get to paint the walls whatever color you want. But owning a home is like adopting a very expensive pet that occasionally breaks and needs surgery. That $250,000 house isn't just going to sit there politely. It's going to need things. Constantly. The general rule of thumb is to budget 1% to 2% of your home's value annually for maintenance and repairs. On a $250,000 house, that's $2,500 to $5,000 per year. That's $200 to $400 every single month that you should be setting aside for when the water heater dies or the AC stops working, or you discover that the roof is leaking into the attic. And if you bought one of those cheaper fixer-uppers to make the numbers work, you're probably looking at the higher end of that range, maybe even more. Then there's the lifestyle inflation that comes with having a house. You need a lawnmower now, maybe a ladder, gardening tools, a snowblower if you're in certain climates. You're suddenly shopping at Home Depot every other weekend, and somehow every trip costs $200. You need furniture for rooms you didn't have before. The utility bills are higher because you're heating and cooling more space. If something breaks, you can't just call the landlord. You're the landlord now, except you're also the tenant, and you're paying yourself to fix everything. What really gets people is the big-ticket items that fail all at once. Like your water heater doesn't slowly get worse, it just dies one day, and now you need $1,200 immediately. Your HVAC system doesn't give you a 6-month warning. It stops working during the hottest week of summer, and the replacement costs $6,000. These things have lifespans, and if you bought a house that's 15 or 20 years old, multiple systems might be near the end of their lives at the same time. I've talked to so many people who bought a house they could afford on paper, and within the first 2 years, they're drowning in credit card debt because they had to replace the roof, fix foundation cracks, and upgrade electrical wiring that wasn't up to code. The house became a money pit, and they can't sell without taking a loss because they haven't built up enough equity yet. The cruel irony is that the people who can barely afford the mortgage payment are the same people who can't afford the $5,000 emergency fund for home repairs. So when something breaks, it goes on a credit card at 22% interest, and now you're paying for that water heater for the next 3 years. The two-income trap. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Most households buying homes today are two-income households. And that creates a really specific kind of vulnerability that I think people underestimate. If you're a couple and you're both working and you're using both incomes to qualify for the mortgage, what happens if one person loses their job, or wants to take parental leave, or has a health issue that takes them out of work for 6 months? Suddenly, a household that could afford the mortgage can't make the payments anymore. You've built your entire financial stability on the assumption that nothing will disrupt both income streams, and that's a risky assumption. Previous generations often bought homes on a single income, and the second income was extra. It went to savings, vacations, college funds. Now, both incomes are required just to cover the basics, which means there's no cushion. You're financially optimized in a way that's incredibly fragile. And this affects family planning in ways that are kind of heartbreaking. I know couples who want to have kids but can't figure out how to make it work financially because they need both incomes to cover the mortgage. Taking parental leave becomes this terrifying calculation where you're trying to figure out if you can survive on one income for 3 months without losing the house. The home that's supposed to provide stability becomes a source of massive stress. There's also the geographic trap. When you own a home, you're stuck. If a better job opens up in another city, you can't just move easily. You've got to sell the house, which means paying realtor commissions, hoping the market is good, coordinating timing so you're not paying two mortgages or stuck in temporary housing. Renters have flexibility. Homeowners have anchors. Who actually can afford this? So, after walking through all of that, let's be honest about who can actually realistically afford a $250,000 house in 2026 without making it their entire personality and life purpose. You need a household income of at least $90,000 to $100,000 to comfortably handle the monthly payments. You need $25,000 to $35,000 saved up for the down payment and closing costs. You need another $10,000 to $15,000 in emergency savings that you don't touch, specifically for when the house needs repairs. And you need job stability, ideally two incomes that aren't going anywhere, or one very secure income if you're single. That's not most Americans. That's a specific slice of the population. Dual income professional couples, successful single people in high-paying careers, folks who received financial help from family, or people who bought years ago when prices were lower and are now moving up. The median household in America cannot afford a $250,000 house. Not comfortably, not without stretching themselves thin financially and living one emergency away from disaster. And that's genuinely wild because $250,000 used to be a starter home price. Now it requires an upper middle class income. The generational divide nobody wants to acknowledge. I think what frustrates people the most is the comparison to previous generations. And honestly, the numbers are pretty stark. In 1980, the median home price was about $47,200. And the median household income was around $21,000. That's a ratio of about 2.2 to 1. Today, the median home price is around $420,000, and median household income is about $75,000. That's a ratio of 5.6 to 1. Houses cost more than twice as much relative to income compared to the 1980s. And that's before you factor in student loans, which barely existed as a burden for previous generations, or healthcare costs, which have exploded, or childcare, which now costs as much as college tuition in some places. Baby boomers bought homes in their 20s on single incomes with high school diplomas. Millennials and Gen Z are buying homes in their 30s with college degrees and dual incomes, if they're buying at all. The finish line moved, and it moved dramatically. And when older folks say things like, we sacrificed too, or just work harder, it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how different the math is now. Yes, every generation faced challenges, but the specific challenge of housing affordability is objectively worse now than it was in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s. This isn't opinion. This is math. So, what can you actually do? All right, after all that doom and gloom, let's talk about actual strategies for people who are trying to make this work. First, be ruthlessly honest about what you can afford. Don't use the bank's maximum approval amount. Use your own calculation based on your actual monthly budget. If you know you need $800 a month for food, $200 for utilities, $150 for gas, $100 for phone, and whatever else, build that budget first. Then see what's left for housing. That number is your real limit, not whatever some loan officer says you qualify for. Second, the down payment is the biggest barrier, so attack that strategically. High-yield savings accounts are paying 4% to 5% right now. Use them. Automate your savings so the money moves before you can spend it. Look into first-time homebuyer programs in your state, which often offer down payment assistance or better loan terms. Some areas have programs specifically for teachers, healthcare workers, or other professions. Third, consider less obvious locations. I'm not saying move somewhere you'll be miserable, but if you're fixated on a specific trendy neighborhood or city, you might be pricing yourself out unnecessarily. Sometimes driving an extra 15 minutes gets you way more house for way less money. Sometimes a less cool city has everything you actually need. Good jobs, reasonable cost of living, decent schools, without the inflated prices. Fourth, if you're part of a couple, have honest conversations about risk. What happens if one person loses their job? Can you cover the mortgage on one income, even temporarily? If not, you might be stretching too far. Build a bigger emergency fund before buying. Wait another year and save more. The house will still be there, and you'll be in a much stronger position. And fifth, and this is controversial, consider whether you actually need to buy right now. Renting isn't failure. Renting is flexibility. If you're not sure where you'll be in 5 years, if you don't have the savings cushion, if the math doesn't work without making you anxious, it's okay to wait. Homeownership is sold as this mandatory milestone, but it's just one option for housing. It's not the only path to financial security or happiness. The bigger picture. Here's what bothers me most about all of this. We've created a system where housing, a basic human need, has become primarily an investment vehicle. People don't just buy homes to live in them. They buy homes expecting them to appreciate, to build equity, to eventually sell for a profit. And that mindset, multiplied across millions of buyers, has turned housing into an asset class where prices are completely disconnected from what working people can actually afford. When housing is treated as an investment first and a place to live second, you get markets where foreign investors buy properties they'll never live in, where corporations gobble up single-family homes to rent them out, where people stretch themselves financially because they're afraid of being priced out forever. The entire system incentivizes prices going up because existing homeowners want their property values to increase. But every time prices go up, it gets harder for the next generation to buy in. I don't have a magic solution for this. It's a structural problem that would require serious policy changes, more housing construction, zoning reform, limits on corporate ownership of single-family homes, maybe even rethinking how we tax property and capital gains. But those are political fights that take years. And in the meantime, you've got millions of people just trying to find a place to live. What I do know is this. If you're struggling to afford a home right now, it's not because you're bad with money or because you're not working hard enough. The system is genuinely harder than it used to be. The math is worse, the barriers are higher. And acknowledging that reality doesn't mean giving up. It means seeing the situation clearly so you can make informed decisions about what's actually achievable for you. Moving forward. So where does this leave us? Who can afford a $250,000 house in 2026? The honest answer is fewer people than should be able to. People who are well above median income, people with significant savings, people with help from family, People who got lucky with timing or location. It's not the accessible entry point into homeownership that it should be. But here's the thing. Understanding the reality is the first step to navigating it. If you know you need $100,000 in household income and $35,000 saved to do this comfortably, you can make a plan to get there. Maybe that takes 3 years. Maybe it takes 5. Maybe it means focusing on career growth or moving to a different area or waiting for the market to shift. But at least you're working with real numbers instead of hope and guesswork. And if you look at the numbers and realize it's not feasible right now, that's valuable information too. You can stop beating yourself up and instead focus on building financial stability in other ways. Maxing out retirement accounts, building passive income, investing in index funds. What?